Now then, we come to our keynote opening speech for this morning. I said at the beginning of the conference that EuRA is like an extended family, and so it is. And every year when I meet Steve Cryne, who, as you know, comes from Canada, but actually comes from the same neck of the woods in the northwest of England as I do. And every time I see Steve every year, he's like the cousin, you know, coming back for Christmas. I say, Steve, how's your mother? Well, she's 96 and she's still going strong. And he says, and how's your mother? They live very close to one another, and she's 95 and she's going strong. But Steve tells me this morning over breakfast that he's now expecting his second grandchild. Not him personally, obviously. So I think that deserves a round of applause anyway. Steve is the president of the Canadian Employee Relocation Council, acronym CERC, and they are the leading provider of professional education and information to the relocation industry in Canada. CERC also works with the government to effect change to legislation and regulatory practices that impede workforce mobility. And prior to joining CERC in September 2002, Steve had his own consulting practice providing strategic planning and communication services. He also has an extensive background in association management and government relations. He puts an awful lot of work into a piece of research which I think is the first time it will be revealed today to the EuRA Conference on the future of mobility. And I would ask you please to give a very, very warm welcome to our old friend Steve Cryne.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction, as always, Francis. And I think that your mom and my mom should get together and tear up the town. Good morning, everybody. How are we this morning? Good morning. Thank you for coming out and being with us this morning. I know that you've got a lot of business to attend to, so I greatly appreciate your attendance this morning at this session. And what a pleasure it is to be with you today in such a wonderful country, so rich in culture, steeped in history, with fabulous food and hospitality. And who could ask for a better location? Tad and Dom, my hat is off to both of you. An outstanding conference program and an amazing venue. I don't know how you're going to top this, but I guess we'll find out later on this afternoon. EuRA has grown so much in the last several years, and I'm delighted to be a small part of your success. Today, I'd like to share with you the results of our recent survey, our recent research project about the future of talent mobility. Last fall, last fall, EuRA and CERC began a research project to explore the wide spectrum of survey research conducted on global employee mobility. Paul Coleman, who's here in the room, was instrumental in guiding us along this path. And we wanted to embark on a journey that explored the scope of research that has been done by many different groups. So for now, we're calling it a survey of surveys, but watch for something a little bit more definitive in the weeks to come. The research was just completed on Sunday of this week, right down to the wire, Dom, absolutely. But I think that we've come up with some very, very good insights into where our industry is heading. So many studies have been done, but we wanted to gain a deeper understanding about our industry, about the factors that are shaping its development, and present some considerations for the future. I think that this project also symbolizes the growing partnership between our two organizations, and I hope it will lead to more collaboration and cooperation in the years to come. And so to begin, we know that the world is undergoing a significant shift, and I think this quote from McKinsey & Company frames it best. The collision of technical disruption, rapid emerging market growth, widespread aging, and that's upending many of the widely held assumptions that we used to use to make decisions and manage our organizations. Some key factors are behind this change, and it will impact our industry, which is estimated to generate about $60 to $70 billion per year. First one is globalization. That's the shifting power of economic might from west to east. Demographic change, unprecedented change going on in our demographics around the world, unprecedented since the Middle Ages. In my own country in Canada, just to put this into some perspective, in 2010, there were about four working people for every retiree. It's projected that by 2025, 2030, that number will decline to less than 2 working people for every retiree. So it's a significant challenge, not only in North America, Europe, but in many other places. We also have individualism, the power of people to choose, the power to make choices, and the movement towards knowledge-based economies. Technology and the digital age, and dare I say robotics and driverless cars, are just on the horizon. Taken together, these factors have changed the way that we work, the way that we live and communicate, and increased the demand for skilled workers and specialists. This demand will continue to grow exponentially in the decades ahead. Today, our business leaders must be capable of operating in a global business world that is more technically advanced, demographically complex, and geographically diverse than ever before in our history. Talent mobility will be an important part of the solution to these challenges. The report we have recently concluded gathers some of the best research from a wide array of sources, and it provides insights about how we as an industry can respond to these mega trends that I've just laid out. These challenges that are shaping our workplaces and our economies. And taking a piece from yesterday's presentations, and of course the ongoing dialogue today, that will all be founded with conscious capitalism markers to guide us along our journey. Whoever that was, you are putting money into the... Right. So put up your hands so they can come and get the money off you later. This could get very expensive for some people this morning. And so I am pleased to have the opportunity to share our findings with you today. And so to our study, the methodology behind it. It's a content analysis was conducted on 57 reports that were published between 2011 and 2015-16. Reports were selected if they were a survey of employers, employees, or the general public on the topic of global employee mobility, or if they related in some way to the content of the survey reports. The list was vetted by both CERC and EuRA, and the articles reflect a diverse group of publishers, including consultancies, auditors, accountants, associations, financial institutions, RMCs, vendors, suppliers, market research, polling companies, think tanks, quasi-government agencies, and many more. Content was analyzed using a quantitative database of all the findings across the 57 reports, which we will be able to update on an ongoing basis in the years ahead. Our analysis sought for areas of consensus. We were looking for top trends and challenges, best practices for success and risk mitigation, and cross-cutting analysis to see if the combined data generated any new findings for our industry in trying to predict what lies ahead. In total, some 25,000 respondents were included in the survey, are included in the study, across 140 countries. But is there consensus? We think that there is, from the literature that we studied. A strong majority of employers across the survey reports that we looked at indicate the number of mobile employees in their organizations will increase in the future or remain at the same levels. Only a small minority of employers say they will not be increasing the number of employees they expect to relocate. There's a great quote from Sebastian Riesch, who is at the University of Navarra, which was included in one of the reports that we that we reviewed. And he said this, he said, without much clarity on whether globalization will accelerate even further, or rather slow down, which is subject to some discussion, it seems quite certain to predict that global mobility will remain critical. And I think that's in large part because of the reasons I outlined at the beginning of the presentation around those mega trends. In the 2014 PricewaterhouseCoopers Moving People with Purpose, as many as 89% of the organizations indicated that they plan to increase their mobile workforce in the next 2 years. The nature of mobility is changing. We're entering a new era for our industry. It used to be driven by early globalization of markets and technology, a newfound access to developing markets, and decreased mobility costs. Today, however, market integration has reached heightened levels of complexity. Technological advancements facilitate instantaneous communications and rapid speed to market of new product lines and services. The balance between emerging and developed markets is shifting due to market maturation, changing demographics, and the rise of government labor regulation. We wanted to take a look at why employers are expanding their mobility programs. Talent gaps continue to be cited as the top motivator for moving employees abroad. As many as 1/3 of employers are cited in the Moving People to Work study. About 1/3 of employers are having trouble filling key positions today. The dynamics of global talent management are also changing. The profile of the Western senior executive being sent to explore foreign market opportunities is long replaced with a more complex and horizontal portrait. Talent management has become a headache for CEOs. In the report Talent Mobility 2020, about 30% of CEOs say that they have the talent they need to fulfill their future growth ambitions. Talent gaps are heightened by the rising competition for scarce talent as well. In our own country, former Premier of Quebec, Jean Charest, who was the architect of a mobility accord between France and Quebec, has put it this way: we are entering the era of unparalleled talent scarcity, which, if left unaddressed, will put a brake on economic growth around the world and will fundamentally change the way we approach workforce challenges. Reality is that about 71% of firms today actively search for talent in different geographical locations, industries, and demographic areas. Shortages and surpluses are arriving in new ways, and the need to shift human capital to have a truly global talent pool is more than a competitive advantage today. It is perhaps the only advantage that business has in this new knowledge-based economy. To put it in some perspective about the scarcity of labor, in China, it is expected that there will be a shortfall of some 23 million skilled workers by 2025. Globally, it's projected that there will be about 40 million shortage of skilled workers around the world. But 23 million of those are projected to be in China alone, which has often been a source of talent for many of today's developed nations. The second reason why employers are expanding mobility programs is to expand their global reach. Employers continue to cite market expansion as a key driver for sending employees abroad. While this was also true in the past, the opportunities and barriers of market expansion have evolved. The balance between developed and emerging markets is also shifting. While Western economies continue to send employees to emerging markets in droves, mobile employees from emerging markets are booming, and are not only going to more developed countries, but to other developed markets. For example, the growing trade between Asia and Africa. In the corporate relocation survey results, nearly half of firms in the survey indicated some form of expansion impacted their relocation volumes. This finding is also confirmed by the Strategic Global Mobility Report, which found that mobility professionals regard new market growth as the principal driver behind the growing need for global mobility. And further, in the Moving People with Purpose report, 75% of mobility professionals agree that assignment destinations match their organization's priorities and destinations for future business growth. The third reason why employers are expanding mobility programs is to develop their top talent. Successful organizations today realize that their futures rely on making sure their high-potential employees develop a global mindset through international experience. They will have to be comfortable leading colleagues and pursuing market opportunities from very different corners of the world. International experiences are also seen as opportunities to build intangible leadership skills, agility, the ability to navigate ambiguity, and interpersonal comfort that crosses cultural lines. The World Economic Forum, incidentally, identifies these as the top skills that will be in demand as we head towards the year 2020. To support that position, I'd like to share some comments from the research that we reviewed. This is from the head of an international assignments for a European-based building products manufacturer, which I thought was a great quote to share with you this morning. And he said this: "In our company, we have a profound succession planning process, which is discussed regularly among C-level executives, and global mobility falls directly under this. This is the kind of clarity in thought, this is the kind of strategic direction that companies need to be adopting around the role of talent mobility today and in the future." In the reports that we reviewed from Expat Explorer, nearly 2/3, 65%, of those earning over $250,000 US per year say they have been expats on more than one occasion. And in the Talent Mobility 2020 report, 2/3 of employers say that they plan to devote more attention to developing their talent pipeline and the future leaders of their organizations through international experience. Now, the fourth reason that employers are expanding mobility programs is to attract and fulfill employees. A key evolution of the employee mobility sector is that employees themselves are asking for international assignments in large numbers. It's not lost on the broader talent base that global experiences have become a stepping stone to promotion and mandatory for senior leadership. While the previous generations held mixed views regarding the personal value of international work, millennials in particular, both in developed and developing nations, are increasingly requesting these assignments. International posts, therefore, is a key tool in the global contest for global talent today. Millennial generation will make up 50% of the workforce in less than a decade. And a recent study by PwC reports that of 4,000 millennial generation survey participants in some work that they did, 80% of those surveyed, of those 4,000, state that they want to work outside of their home country at some point during their career. It will be seen as a rite of passage. Another survey that we looked at was the Modern Mobility Survey, with more than 50% of the graduates in that survey between 25 and 34 years of age are likely to be living in emerging markets by 2020. About 29% of those will be in China, about 12% in India, and 6% in Indonesia. So it makes sense to tap into these talent pools now and to create a global employer brand to compete in the battle for talent with local employers. Let's take a look at some of the hiring intentions that we have today. Knowledge workers are in the greatest demand. And I think that goes back to the point I made at the beginning of today's presentation around the shift that we have towards knowledge-based economies. Knowledge workers are in the greatest demand because they are innovators, they're problem solvers, and they can manage complexity, uncertainty, and forge relations at an international level. Speaking from the Canadian lens on this particular point, our new Prime Minister, Prime Minister Trudeau, made a presentation at the World Economic Forum in January of this year. And he made the point that Canada's on a path, on a journey, to create an economy that's based on innovation. We're not alone in that. Many other countries are trying to forge that direction. But what will drive innovation are those people. It's those people that have innovation. They're problem solvers. They can manage complexity and forge relations at an international level. Talent mobility and what you folks do in bringing those people together provides the fuel for the development of those economies that are on that road. No matter what area of the industry that you are into, that you are practicing in rather, you are fueling that direction. When we look at what CEOs think, it's no surprise that within this background and within this context, they're very concerned about what's going on and their ability to attract and retain key talent. It's at an all-time high. It's jumped 15% since 2013. One of the things that we uncover, and I'll speak a little bit about this later, is how government and business are trying to work together in a cooperative fashion to facilitate more mobility. But almost 1 in 2 CEOs within this survey from PwC, their global survey in January of 2015, almost 1 in 2 CEOs do not feel the government is working hard enough to find ways and assist business in the movement of skilled workers. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. From our research, we identified the top 3 challenges for employers today. The first one, no surprise perhaps to many of you in the room, there we go, is cost pressures. Global economic confidence has hardly recovered from the recent effects of the European debt crisis, let alone the global economic crash of 2008, 2009. On the horizon in Europe, we have the situation of Brexit. On the horizon in the US, we have the US election. So there's no doubt that all of these factors coming together, they're bringing an increasing pressure on mobility professionals to find ways to improve cost management. While this pressure isn't slowing mobility volumes or necessarily shrinking budgets, it is driving managers and mobility professionals to more clearly demonstrate effective management and return on investment. One of the surveys that we looked at was the biggest challenges survey for international assignments. And a conclusion from that report said the most significant current challenge companies face is cost of international assignments at about 68% of the respondents. Another report was the Mindful Mobility report. And in that report, 74%, 3/4 of respondents, indicated that they had been required to reduce international assignment costs in 2014 in response to economic pressures. The second major challenge, and this is one that in my country gets an awful lot of attention, is around compliance. Changing tax requirements and government regulations, red tape, quickly becoming the top risk faced by global employers. The risks around tax and immigration are of great concern to businesses today. And we have to find a way to undo some of that red tape that exists. Because governments in every corner of the world are ramping up pressure around enforcement on these regulations, whether it's around temporary entry of foreign workers, whether it's around collecting remittances from employees, foreign workers that are working and visiting the countries. There is a very aggressive agenda on the part of governments to enforce their rules and regulations around these issues. In fact, in the global CEO survey that I referred to a few moments ago, over-regulation is cited by CEOs as a top concern and a barrier to business growth. And as compliance becomes increasingly complex and increasingly important, employers appear to be increasing the levels of outsourcing this work to external consultants. And despite this rising need, many companies are facing avoidable penalties for non-compliance. One of the reports that we looked at was the Global Effectiveness Report, Global Mobility Effectiveness Report, pardon me. And in that report, some 40% of respondents said that they did not have a formal risk control framework to monitor payroll tax and Social Security compliance. 64% of those companies said that they had incurred avoidable penalties for non-compliance in 2012. So there are many opportunities here for companies to find ways in order to make sure that they have the programs, that they have the management processes in place in order to be compliant with rules around tax and immigration more specifically. The third top challenge for employers that we identified through the research was the evolving complexity of our mobility programs. It's not only perhaps changing, the numbers may be growing, but the complexity of those assignments are growing. The traditional long-term assignment, for example, is being replaced with a wide variety of assignment types, which managers can use to balance cost pressures and generate the most value, which I'm sure many of you in this room are living and breathing today. What do employees think? We wanted to take a look at some of the research that was done around gathering information and feedback from expats, and also people that were considering opportunities to move. Individualism is driving a lot of this need for flexibility today. As I said at the beginning, one of those mega trends is that we have choices today, and we love to exert our individualism. We want the latte with our initials on the top because it makes us feel very, very special. And we expect to see those things across many of the other services that we interact with. We want the best Uber car to pick us up at the right time. And so we have these choices to make as individuals. We're very fortunate. But those factors are also impacting the things that we do as mobility professionals. We found that employees, they want solutions that fit their needs and the needs of their families. Surveys reports that we studied found that willingness to relocate for work, more than half of the people are favorable to the idea. But it's important that we understand the employee base. And therefore, it's important that we understand what the different segments and rather what their needs are that need to be met. I'll give you an example. In the CERC Global Mobility Survey that we conducted in 2013, we commissioned Ipsos Public Research to do a survey of there were around 12,000 people across 24 countries about their willingness to move. The question was quite simple. Would you take a job in another country for 2 to 3 years, all of your expenses paid, a trip home every year, and will also bring you back to the position that, or a position that it was equal to the position that you left at the time of the assignment? The results were that 1/4 said that they would be very likely. So 1 in 4 said, yeah, I'd do that. I'll go tomorrow. 32%, however, said, I might think about it if the package is right, if I can get the right incentives that will help me make those decisions. So it's really important that we try to respond to that need for individualism, that need for flexibility within the assignment populations that we're managing today. Let's take a closer look at that employee segmentations around some of the key, I think, key drivers of some of those segmentations today. The first one, perhaps no surprise, millennials. 74% of respondents, which include both men and women, said the most preferential time to complete a mobility experience is in the first 6 years of their career. But in the Moving People with Purpose report, only 1/3 of organizations don't currently, a third of organizations don't currently offer early mobility opportunities to their young workers. Clearly a lost opportunity to develop leadership skills and to fill the talent pipeline. Women are also driving some of this change. Enhancing the Link report was one of the studies that we looked at. And it said whether it's developing strategies to increase and support female assignees, which is still hovering at less than 20% of most assignee populations, or creating integration strategies for a key market such as India, mobility has a natural opportunity to link with diversity and inclusion in forging success of their talent mobility programs. Moving Women with Purpose was another report that we took a look at. And in that report from the respondents, there was a very good quote as well. It said, we are experiencing pardon me. In that report, Moving Women with Purpose, it stated we are you know what I mean. We're experiencing a time of unprecedented and as yet unmet female demand for international mobility. 71% of female millennials are eager to work abroad during their career. But as pointed out on the slide, only 20% of the currently international population are women. And diversity. I think this is one area that is growing and it's going to continue to grow. Diversity issues are becoming more opaque, more complicated with societal norms that are bumping up against jurisdictional issues. And we're seeing some of that even in our modern economies. The point was made yesterday in reference to the United States about this conscious capitalism idea, about where people are going to locate their organizations. And I think that this whole issue around diversity is going to determine where companies will establish new markets, where they will send their top talent for the risks of and because of the complexities of diversity today. So I think that that's one other issue that we need to keep our eyes on. No surprise, family concerns remain the top challenges. Still driving employee challenges, though demographic shifts are making what the modern family looks like today very different than it has been in the past. In the Mindful Mobility Report, another one that we looked at, family concerns were cited as the single most noted reason for assignment refusal. In addition, respondents cited it as the top reason for early assignment return and the third most commonly noted reason for an assignment failure. In those reports, 65% of the respondents cite personal issues such as a lack of adequate schools, insufficient housing, or adequate work opportunities. They may have ailing parents, working parents at the same time, one of the reports that we also looked at in the Global Mobility Effectiveness survey was a quote from Nestle, which I think is very telling today. At that company, nearly 70% of top talent executives at Nestle come from dual career families. And that means they have to have a solution for the spouses of the employees we send on international assignments. Okay, so that's a little bit of background. What do we see ahead after examining 57 reports that have been published over the past 4 or 5 years, with input from 25,000 respondents across 140 countries? 4 key trends that we'll discuss a little in detail in the next few minutes. Flexible program design as a result of the globalized talent pool, shifting employee demographics and demands. Secondly, an increasingly strategic role for mobility within the organization. A heightened focus and expertise in return on investment and data analytics, and more collaboration between business and government on labor regulations. Let's take a look at that global talent pool and open diversity. We're likely to continue to see increases in employee mobility, but not as it looked yesterday or even today. The diversity of the assignment type and the policy types that are supporting those assignments is being driven by a few factors. Cost pressures are driving employers to consider less expensive options for mobilizing talent, ranging from short-term assignments and employing regional staff to virtual teams and local plus packages. Technology is making these different options easier to manage, and demand from employees, especially around millennials, is also driving flexibility. The diversity of options is complex, but it can be a massive strength for employers as they find that right incentive package for their budget and for their top talent. In the report Talent Mobility 2020, 78% of the firms said that they expected to see changes in the way the company manages talent in the near future. Corporate professionals find themselves responsible for far more policy types than in the past. This whole notion of flexibility and the one-size-fits-all approach is one of the challenges for modern professionals, for modern mobility professionals today. I've referred to the Expat Explorer as one of the studies that we took a look at. But they said this in their report: by adapting to the preferences and the needs of different generations and groups of employees, organizations are likely to bring about a fundamental change in the assignment duration, package, type, and value, and above all else, success. So allowing flexibility for employees within that global framework so that the individual can select the assignment benefits of most value to them. The sense of employee ownership of the assignment increases, as well as the recognition of the investment the organization is making. The second factor or trend that we've observed is how companies are integrating mobility into organizational strategy. As the value proposition of mobility shifts, so does its role in the organization. Mobility professionals and consultancies are all advocating for mobility to have a seat at the table, to play a more strategic role in the organization, and to become embedded in a diverse range of organizational activities and play a broader role in human resources. Here's some of the comments from the reports that we studied. This is from the Global Mobility Effectiveness Survey. As mobility leaders, we are on a journey so that we can be more strategic about how we align talent strategy with business strategy and overall success. Moving people with purpose. We want the business to see global mobility as an enabler to the development of leadership roles and to nurture the development of the future of our organization. And yet, much of the research found that despite the tangible benefits of getting it right, global mobility remains a low priority on the list of strategic imperatives in many companies. It is among most organizations' business priorities, not a principal area of focus. In fact, what we found, and it's in the Strategic Global Mobility Study, many organizations today do not have a formal mobility strategy in place. The third future trend that we see is how do we prove the return on investment of mobility? All surveys that we looked at that asked about tracking, evaluating, and other elements related to return on investment clearly show that organizations are not excelling in this area at all. So without that information, how can managers make evidence-informed decisions? In the Moving People with Purpose report, we found 3 in 4 respondents expect to be measuring return on investment from mobility in 2 years' time. So 3 in 4 expect to be able to do that in a couple of years. But today, only 9% of companies in many of the studies that so less than 10% in many of the studies that we looked at are doing this today. They don't have the tools in order to determine return on investment. In fact, many say that they can't accurately quantify the cost of their programs. Even by 2017, only around half expect to be able to do this accurately. So the opportunity is there. Big data and data analytics are beginning to help drive new informed decision-making in mobility. Ideally, mobility should be viewed as a business investment in the same way as talent mobility. Mobility should be viewed as a business investment in the same way as talent is more broadly viewed, rather than simply being a cost that is being contained across the enterprise. And that is being taken, that's a quote from Moving People with Purpose. And they set out, actually this is a very good report, Moving People with Purpose. If you get a chance, take a look at it. But it gives, one of the challenges that I have encountered in many of the conferences that I speak at and many of the surveys that we do is that companies, when it comes to ROI, they're not able to get their arms around it, or mobility professionals. It's such a huge piece. And there's some good tools in this report, and they talk about sample metrics, and I'll just share a couple of those with you in terms of what they might be. And maybe it's just 1 or 2 that we utilize to determine the ROI or get on that track. So that would be project completion, employee retention, development of new skills from the assignment, successful repatriation, performance ratings, employee performance ratings, employee satisfaction ratings with the process, and whether or not knowledge has been transferred to the host location. The fourth one, of course, is this big word, this big change around data analytics. We talked about technology at the outset. And this is perhaps the second missed opportunity of today's global mobility environment. But it's sure to be a top driver of tomorrow's environment. And it's this role of technology and data analytics. And I'd encourage you to explore this in more detail, because for better program management, it is one of the key tools in the future. It's going to lead to improved employee experiences, and therefore mobility professionals must stay on top of technological advancements in this area. In the Global CEO Survey, which I referred to a little earlier on, the majority of CEOs believe that investments in digital technologies have created value for their businesses, and around 80% say that mobile technologies and data analytics are key strands in their strategies. In the Moving People with Purpose report that we studied, a great quote from this, and it's from a company. It's called Guidewire, and I'm going to quote from this directly. It said, and this is the gentleman at Guidewire speaking. He said, "I quickly realized the employee at the employee experience at Guidewire is critical. The people we move are software developers and consultants. They don't want long policy documents and briefings. They want to be able to get the information they need at their fingertips and when they want it. So the use of predictive analytics in HR is still in its relative infancy, but an increasing number of successful organizations are beginning to embrace the concept. The data is available, but more sophisticated analysis would provide valuable trend information and the potential to identify risks. And so to the final point, and that is around increased government collaboration. With all of this change that has been going on, employers have not been necessarily passive in response to heightened pressures over government regulations, red tape, and compliance requirements. Even where their governments don't quite see it, employers know that mobile labor is a national economic advantage. Developed countries with an aging population and aging workforces as a consequence will become less dependent on their domestic labor force. And employers and associations such as ours and EuRA and ERC, they're trying to help governments and business to recognize that and the value of mobility to the future. The complexity trend may be here to stay, but the restrictive nature of government regulation must change if we are to be successful in this area. In the Global CEO Survey, while CEOs don't think that governments are doing enough, an equal number plan to work with their governments to develop a skilled and adaptable workforce in the coming years. 27% want to collaborate with government to create a more competitive and tax-efficient survey. In the report Talent Mobility 2020, which I've referred to a few times throughout this presentation this morning, concluded that those countries that recognize that their aging workforce will soon create a pressing need for imported talent have already taken the first steps towards lowering their immigration barriers, and we predict that more countries will adopt less restrictive immigration programs in the future. I think the jury's going to be out on that one because there's an awful lot of change going on around the world. There's a lot of disruption, and politicians are being forced to make decisions in order to protect their own domestic labor markets. I don't think that enough is being done, and it's important that business has a voice at the table to influence policymakers about the need for more open mobility. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to speak in Geneva at a meeting of the Global Forum on Migration and Development to discuss the growing need for workforce mobility. The meeting was hosted in partnership with the International Organization of Employers and the World Economic Forum Agenda Council on Migration. It was an opportunity to bring business leaders and government officials together in order to try and exchange ideas and find ways to maximize mobility opportunities. At our meeting on Monday, we identified 3 key issues that are challenges in this area when we talk about the need for more mobility and greater flexibility around the movement of key people. The first one is that labor market demand forecasting. We don't have a good enough understanding about where the skills are and where the skills gaps are and how we can go about making that connection. More needs to be done at a country level, at a region, at industry levels, and of course at an enterprise level within firms. Within organizations today, and it's something that I strongly believe in and have for many years, is that labor force planning within the organization itself, when we talk about succession planning and the retirement of skills and the gaps that are going to be there, workforce planning should be job number 1 in any organization today. Another issue that we identified is that we can't agree on what we mean when we speak about skilled workers. Many areas around the world and many industries have different definitions about what that is. So we need to find ways in which we can bring some commonality to those discussions. And the third point is that we've not developed a comprehensive or cohesive and compelling business case about the value of mobility to an economy, to the enterprise, and of course to the individual, because at the end of the day, it is about the individual if they are going to move. We also took a look at some of the opportunities for moving forward. We need to have a model that provides for mobility of skilled professional workers. Of course, we have to define what those skilled professional workers might be. But these are where the opportunities lie. We need to forge more trade agreements that support more open mobility between trading partners. Between Canada and the US, of course, we have the North American Free Trade Agreement. It was written 2 decades ago, and when it comes to labor mobility, is rather long in the tooth. It does not fit the needs of either of our countries today when it comes to the movement of people. We've come to an agreement between Canada and the European Union, the Canada-EU Economic Trade Agreement between our two countries. It's not inked as yet, but we expect that to happen over the next several months. And within that agreement, there are provisions that provide for more open mobility between our two countries, which I think is going to be very important for us and for mobility professionals. I think that it will provide you with more opportunities and business opportunities between our two countries. We also have to figure out, how do we move? You know, we've got this dwindling supply of talent and skilled people. So how do we harmonize our international certification standards with our preferred trading partners? You know, it's interesting, and I'll speak from experience between Canada and America. When there's we get some very bad weather between our two countries, and we often get very bad storms throughout the year. And it's not unusual for us to, you know, in a case of an emergency, our power grid will go down, and we can mobilize our engineers and our technicians between our two countries like that. Like it's amazing how quickly we can do this. And we need to adopt that same mindset between our two countries going forward. And we need to do it with our preferred trading partners. There's no reason why we cannot have harmonization of many of the professionals and skilled labor that we have with countries such as the US, countries in the EU, Great Britain, Australia, and the list goes on. And I think the factors that I spoke about at the beginning are going to force us down that road. We also need to find ways to reduce the restrictions on short-term business travelers, people coming into the country for less than 30 days. They have no impact at all on domestic labor markets. And we need to find ways to get beyond that so that people can enter freely into countries for short-term business purposes. One of the things that we have been working on very closely with our colleagues in the US, our trusted employer programs that remove decisions around immigration from ports of entry. Now, we're not talking about security issues. We're talking about employment issues, removing that from the ports of entry. Other countries that are doing that successfully, Great Britain, Ireland, Sweden to some degree, Australia. In the US, we've been successful with our partners at Worldwide ERC and the Council for Global Immigration. We've been successful in convincing the American government to adopt a pilot program which is called a known employer program. And this provides the opportunity for firms to certify with government officials in order to facilitate the movement of their staff. We also need to do a better job around alignment of tax, social security, healthcare, and financial services. This goes to the very heart of some of those issues I was talking about, individualism of people. If I was speaking with a fellow last week, they're moving some of their top executives down into the US, and this alignment of their financial, their retirement savings and so on, and that social security issue is a major concern for some people not to go. And of course, spousal employment supports and that family issue. We need to find ways to tap into that. So, to conclude, I hope that this report will lead to some further dialogue in our industry and beyond. I hope it will get us thinking about the importance of mobility to economic prosperity, to business success, and to providing meaningful, rewarding careers for our employees and their families. And let's not forget, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, it's the transferee, the trailing spouse, the children, the aging parents, even the family pet. They must be the real heroes in the stories that you folks all create. As we look forward, Dom, Tad, this report will be available in the next couple of weeks on our respective websites. I hope that this initiative will lead to more partnerships between us. Even perhaps it becomes a biannual project between our two organizations. I do thank you for this opportunity to present this kind of brand new piece of work, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. What would you like? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Any questions?
First of all, thank you, because I can imagine taking the core elements out of those reports. Must have been an amazing piece of work. In the course of reading those reports, did you come across any best practices tied to retention upon repatriation? Because this seems to be an issue I come across in my work.
Yes.
When people who have moved to other regions
yes.
actually are repatriated, and it's not just about earning less money and coming off the expat wage.
No.
Thank you.
There's quite a lot of there was quite a lot of research in that area, and there's a lot cited. One of the things that we found, I think, is that less than half of the companies I'm speaking broadly now because there were so many papers that we reviewed, but I'm speaking in broad terms that less than half of the companies that were included in the reports do not have a repatriation strategy. Some of the best practices that we saw in that area clearly were making sure that many of the companies that are successful in that area, they do the planning around repatriation before the employee is sent on the assignment. I think what we do as corporate entities, as employers in this area, is that we do a great job of packing up people and sending them on their way. We do not do a good enough job in the pre-assignment, that candidate selection. Is that person the right person for the assignment? And secondly, in terms of what are we going to do at the end of that assignment? So that good companies, we find, they do those rather well. And they lay out that this, and I think that goes to that point that we said around I guess it was around best practices, I think it was number 3, that they're utilizing mobility to attract and retain their best talent. So the repatriation issue is significant, and I think, just to conclude on that point, I think the companies that do it well do it up front. They don't wait until, Miss Smith and her family are returning next week. What are we going to do for them? Let's find an office, and hopefully everything works out. So it's important that that path is created up front. Yes.
Good morning.
Good
Very
morning.
good in the presentation
Thank
you
you.
did, and you did a great summary of what's happening.
Thank you.
Are you reviewing how many companies are not complying with the regulations of immigration worldwide? What's happening with what they're not doing? That's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah. Specific to your question, I can't answer what companies are doing when it comes to immigration on a global basis. But perhaps I can share with you some of the, because it's an area that I work fairly well, fairly often in and speak to around immigration. What I often find is that companies, particularly at the senior levels, they don't understand the implications of compliance. And more often than not, you'll have an individual who is going on an assignment or, for, let's say, an extended period beyond that 30 days, and it's just tell them that you're going, it's a personal visit. It's not business. And they have no real understanding about the implications of that to the company, nor to the individual. So compliance today, I think that, if we can put a business, I think that we have to continue through forums such as this. I think that we have to continue to put forward a business case around compliance. It's an issue in Canada, I'll tell you. We do a lot on trying to assist companies understand the consequences of their failure to comply with our immigration regulations. If companies under new administrative processes, for example, in Canada that have just been put in place by our government, a company that that is hiring temporary foreign workers and is not and is found to be non-compliant with the regulations, they can be fined up to $1 million. And so it's that kind of information. I think as mobility professionals in this area, I think your job is to identify what those compliance risks are. I think that you have to put it in economic terms, follow the money, so to speak, in terms of getting support and attention from the C-suite on these issues. There's a whole host of consequences to this. Establishing business presence overseas, which then can open the company to tax remittances in that other country, just simply because they have an individual working over there. There was another question.
Take a quick question. Was there a question over here? I didn't see a hand. Is that
Oh,
you?
there. I thought I'd seen one. Yes, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Just touching on the point you mentioned earlier about return on investment.
Yes.
It's a topic that's touched on and off over the years. And I'm just wondering whether you have any insight into any organisations or companies that have established a formula.
No, I don't think that any one company has got, I don't think any one company yet has cracked the proverbial, found the Holy Grail, let's say. I don't think any one company has done that. I will suggest to you that one of the leading experts in this area and very well discusses this is Elizabeth McNulty. She's out of Australia. Elizabeth McNulty. If you Google McNulty, M-C-N-U-L-T-Y, you'll come up with some very good papers that she has written in this area. I'm happy to share with you some research that CERC has done, some papers that we have done. Peggy, I know your organization at ERC has been working on this a lot as well and probably has some things to share.
Where's Peggy?
Peggy's right
Want to
here,
say
sorry.
something?
Thank you, Steve, and hello to everybody out there. What we have also seen is different RMCs have taken a different approach to how they look at ROI across their client base. In addition to that, I think you noted how fatigued we are with ROI. We've been talking about it for many, many years. There's been, I think, a recent bit of energy in the last 6 to 12 months around instead looking at return on productivity and using this instead as a measure to help defend if you will, defend is probably too strong a word, some of the expenses of mobility. So that rather than saying, oh, it costs $1 million to send somebody, instead taking a perspective of what's the lost productivity if you don't have a fully robust experience for them to have, which from my opinion, I think is way more appealing to the people in this room and to our constituents than even the ROI. But anyway, thank you, Steve, for that, and terrific job.
Thank you.